All right, hello everybody. We're going to get started here. Just about 1 o'clock. Thanks for joining us today. Let me just stop sharing my screen so you can see the full picture. And I'm sure folks are still trickling in, but we'll get started. So welcome to the webinar today. My name is Tara Donadio. I'm the Assistant Director of Sustainability here at the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. Our webinar today, part of CDRPC's local government webinar or workshop webinar, is Turn a Handout into a Handshake, Creating Partnerships for Grant Funding Success. For those of you that don't know us, CDRPC is a regional planning and resource center that serves Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties. We foster intergovernmental cooperation, communicating, collaborating, and facilitating regional initiatives. We work with partners to help them address regional problems. We establish this webinar series to help planners sharpen their skills and as a vehicle for Planning and Zoning Board Appeals members to obtain credit hours. Town, village, and city zoning board of appeals and planning board members, as well as county planning board members, must receive 4 hours of training annually. Municipalities have a wide latitude in defining what training is acceptable for credit. After each webinar in the series, each attendee that are registered with an email address will receive an email confirming attendance. This email may be submitted to your municipality for consideration of credit. So thank you to our presenting sponsor, Hodgson & Russ, whose generous support allowed us to offer these trainings free of charge. Thank you so much. And thank you to our session presenters today for sharing their expertise with you all. In addition, for practicing AICP certified planners, the session has been approved for 1 hour of CM credit. So just a few more housekeeping notes. Our attendees join with video and audio off for security purposes. This doesn't mean you're not able to ask questions, but if you want to put them in the Q&A feature chat and or ask questions button at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to be moderating and interjecting from time to time with questions if possible, but there's going to be time for Q&A at the end. For the most part, that's where we'll keep the Q&A. These presentations are going to be archived as a PDF. It's being recorded, and the links to these materials are going to be on our website. So back to today's webinar session. Just a little bit about an overview of what it's going to happen today. So from economic development to comprehensive planning to infrastructure improvement, design and implementation, state or federal grant funding and low interest financing is often the key to changing a deferred community dream into an implemented project. To stand out in a competitive field of funding applications, now is the time to turn the handout into a handshake, to put your community in the strongest position to receive funds from oversubscribed state and federal pools. This presentation, delivered by development professionals with a proven track record of funding success, provides actionable strategies for working together with funding agencies to help them achieve their mission by investing in yours. Today's presentation is by Laberge Group, Ben Syden, AICP Vice President, and Nicole Allen, AICP Director of Planning and Community Development. So just a little bit about these folks. Mr. Syden leverages almost 30 years of experience in partnering with New York State municipalities to benefit clients by developing innovative solutions and impactful projects in strategic planning, economic development, economic and community development, government efficiency, and downtown revitalization. His expertise in guiding the development of projects so that they both meet the needs of client communities and fulfill the mandates and priorities of funding agencies has been critical in securing more than $360 million in funding to support client project implementation. He's a frequent facilitator and author, as well as sought-after guest speaker on the topic of project funding and community development. Ms. Allen manages the planning department and directs all community development projects and staff. With more than 20 years of development experience, she leverages a deep understanding of mandates of various funding sources to support the development of compelling applications for a range of client projects, including planning, economic development, environmental facilities, infrastructure, government services initiatives. Ms. Allen regularly leads the development team in weaving together multiple sources of grants and financing in a cohesive project funding quilt. This approach has contributed to securing more than $360 million in funding for projects since the year of 2000. Thank you both so much for being here. And without further ado, I will let them get into it.
Well, thank you very much, Tara. That was a great introduction. I feel, so I was at a meeting this morning and they used the term chronologically mature. So 30 years is, I guess that puts me in that category now, chronologically mature. But I appreciate everyone coming. We're getting the presentation up. That's the younger version of me, but there's Nicole. But as you mentioned, we have been servicing the Capital District in New York State as a firm for over 57 years. And since we've been tracking some of these funding opportunities, we've secured $360 million, $60 million last year alone on public infrastructure. And we're using our process of turning a handout into a handshake with our client communities throughout the state. We do that together with our engineers to develop a implementable project that collaborates and morphs together the grant writing and the engineering to provide compelling stories, if you may, for the state and federal funders as they look to partner with local communities. Now, we gave us part of this presentation down in New York City at the Association of Towns a few weeks ago. And as Tara mentioned, while we have time at the end of the meeting or end of the presentation for questions and answers, if you have a timely question, put in the chat box. I can't see it right now, but Tara can interject and share that with us at all. Can we move this up? So where the topic of handout or handshake came from is we were giving another discussion with state agencies, and we mentioned the fact that it's time to change the perspective of putting your hand out and saying you're the federal government or you're the state government asking for money as if the state or federal government is an actual ATM. And I know there's a lot of dialogue about what grant funding is, and that grants are basically the state giving back to you some money into your own community. But historically, communities have looked to other levels of government for that handout. And it's easy to understand why. That's because the media coverage right now states that there's money everywhere, that everywhere you turn, there's water money or federal money or Biden money or handouts and earmarks. And it seems as if money is coming out of the sky. And I jokingly said for years that there really isn't a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, except after COVID, they had ARPA. And ARPA was your pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, which was, the storm, which was our pandemic. And since that time, there's been money coming out of every agency for water, for sewer, for transportation. So people think as though it's coming from the sky. We had the bipartisan infrastructure law, the ARPA money. WIA just was announced last week, actually 2 days ago. Governor Hochul put out a press release stating that there's $425 million of water and wastewater money going to be available starting on May 3rd, due around the end of July. At the same time, you see that the CFA is opening up around May 1st, due again last Friday of July. While the New York State budget is still being created and formulated and massaged into a final fiscal year plan, there's a lot of money going to be in there for water and wastewater, parks and recreation. So we see that there's money everywhere and everybody wants that handout. I can't tell you how many communities come over to me and say, I want this, I want that, give me money, I want money. And Nicole and I first start and we say, take a step backwards. What do you need money for? And the reasoning for that is that all funding sources are oversubscribed right now. For every single CDBG grant that's awarded, there's 10 or 15 awards that are, or projects that are not awarded. Same with WIA. Only money that was guaranteed to you was the ARPA money. And now you have this odd bipartisan infrastructure law bill that's bringing in money for transportation, for sidewalks, for water, and for sewer. And even those dollars are oversubscribed. So the premise that we have here is to identify and acknowledge that communities are throughout New York State and throughout our country are challenged on all fronts, whether it's telecommunications or housing, water, wastewater, parks and recreation, youth services, senior services. Every community has one or more of these needs. So the question becomes, how do I prioritize that? How do I propel my project and my community forward? And how do I go about, instead of asking for money and simply putting my hand out, how do I make my community an attractive place to invest state or federal monies? And that's really the premise for our conversation today. Our presentation is now frozen. Forgive me, we are having technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Ben touched something.
I was going to ask if I can help, but I think it's on your end. So
I was moving the taskbar down so I can see the next slide.
that'll happen.
Hold on, we'll just do a new share. Oh,
But in the meantime, I'll keep going off the old-fashioned paper. So when we talk about shifting our perspective, and we talk about the key elements to a handout to a handshake, well, we're beginning to talk about three specific pieces. Number one is shifting your perspective. Number two is keeping open lines of communication. And number three is to identify early and often what the critical metrics are of the agencies that you're seeking to get funding from. And with that, what I mean by that is some of your critical metrics are going to be unwritten, unspoken, and ever changing. They're hidden in the agencies themselves. And when you get grant applications, submit them, they start reviewing them with a slightly different rubric than what you're normally aware of. So we want to talk about how to be ready, how to prepare that documentation, how truly to turn the focus from you asking to them investing, them being globally the state or federal government, or even nonprofits and third parties. And when doing that, what you're doing is shifting your perspective from me to we. And that's a little symbol that even my kids' youth softball programs use, your daughter probably has it as well, is that we talk about how the we is more important than me. You're shifting the perspective of the government from your individual community needs to their agency priorities and collectively developing a new solution path that is an investment of their funds with your needs in your community. Now, and we talk about the shifting of perspective because communities have to really be understanding that you have 933 towns in the state, 535 or 4 villages, 62 counties. And if you look nationally, you have 56 state territories and districts all looking for funding. So when you're saying I have $425 million available, it sounds great, especially if you use the lotto guy. $425 million. It sounds like a lot of money. But when you have to divvy it up amongst all these type of communities, towns and villages and counties, it doesn't go far. And take that one level past that, look at the federal level. When you have $500 million, that's not a lot of money when it goes out to every state. And then if you're a little smaller village of 500-600 people, even a moderate size upstate village of 1,500 to 3,000 people, how do you compete against New York City, Buffalo, or Binghamton for maybe one of 2 federal projects delineations in your own state? So it gets very challenging. So you have to begin to shift that perspective to understanding how important is your project to the region and state. We all know it's important to you, and it may be your number one priority, but how does it rank or rate with the other communities in your regional council? And how does that compete with the state, if you're looking at a New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, or Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or even Puerto Rico with EPA funds competing against New York State? How does your project rank? Is it the number one project in the region, or is it the number one project in the state? And really have that hard discussion with your boards as to this is either strong or it's really a long shot. So you have to shift that perspective. And in doing so, you have to realize that it's beyond the standard just community needs assessment. About 20 years ago, Governor Pataki started pushing community planning, needs assessments, and public support of projects as a large part of grant applications, where it was no longer simply a mayor or a supervisor saying, hey, I want this as a pet project. It really became a community needs assessment. But now, again, shifting that perspective, you have to look at the regional priorities, state priorities. You also have to be flexible in understanding and molding your project to meet those needs. So while you may want a park or a recreational project or a swimming pool, you have to say, well, why is this swimming pool important to me? And change it to why is it important to us? Is that swimming pool now going to be a regional community asset? Can you now run a 4-town or a county-wide summer daycare or programming for summer camp, which allows workers to go back to work? Will you be that daycare for them and the summer programming for more than just yourself? How do I get the state to see that it's important to do my project? And that's really molding the projects from a me to a we mentality. And it's turning that perspective inwards. It's having that honest assessment of your priority projects. Again, what may be important to you may not really be important to somebody else. And the potential economic impact. Are you simply asking for money for a water system because it's aged, because it's old, because It's 100 years old. Well, there's many systems that are old, but are you broken? Are you contaminated? Do you have consent orders? Do you have violations? What can we do as a state to really understand that this is an important piece, not just for you, but for everybody else, but also that it's not self-created. That's not a hardship that you created by not funding the maintenance. So by doing deferred maintenance is not a reason unto itself to get a grant. If you're breaking, if it's undersized, if your well is contaminated or your water source is contaminated, or you have a surface water supply that Department of Health won't permit anymore, these are all issues that help propel your project from a local need to a regional need. And it's really understanding those state goals. This year, if you look at the press release that the governor sent out 2 weeks ago, it's very timely. The press release states that the requirements, eligibility, and program will be available May 3rd. But they do go into a little bit of discussion that emerging contaminants is going to be a top priority this year. So if you're a community looking for funding and you know that you have some contaminants, it's a great opportunity now to partner with the state and leverage that state priority in your own community. It's shifting and changing the perspective again to a more realistic approach of how to fund projects in your own community. You do that because you have to really explain to the public and explain to the funders who are already oversubscribed, and Nicole is going to go through triaging in a moment, about why your project should be their most important project and their most important investment. We use that word investment because truly that's what's happening. Yes, it's a grant. Sometimes it's reimbursable. Sometimes it's provided at the end of the program after you've done it, but you're asking the state to act as a bank per se and invest money that the public has given them to watch over, and invest their public dollars from everybody in the state into your individual community. If you change that thought then from the ATM to the investor, it begins to make you think about your project and think about how you present your project, and changes the concept from, again, an ATM where you're simply trying to get some of those tax dollars back to your community, to the investment plan that with their investment, you can now achieve your joint goals. And that's what we're trying to get across on the perspective piece. And I go back to what I mentioned earlier on water and wastewater. This year and last year, you'll see another round of funding. It's really about the functionality of the system that you have. Is it beyond repair, obsolete? Village of Greenwich secured $4 million last year through federal earmarks to replace their system because it's obsolete and beyond repair. Other communities simply have an odor issue and they couldn't get funding because it's odorific, or just because it's smelly. Just because it's smelly doesn't make it a priority, but broken, non-functioning, obsolete is. Do you want a wastewater system just because you think it's going to propel economic development? Or is it really holding you back because you have septic systems that are bubbling up to the surface, or you're leaching into your waterway or your streams? These are all issues of public health and safety that you should be considering as you look for those investments and those investors from the state and federal government. But shifting the perspective is also about making your case, about triaging your own project. And that's something Nicole does every day with our clients.
Right. It's very similar to what a hospital will have to do with the triage when you come in. I know people don't like to know that they're not the number one priority and that they're going to be not going to be the first one served, but the hospital has to make those same decisions every day to make sure that they're treating those that are most critical and most in need first so that they can do life-saving. So as you start thinking about your own projects, you have to come into the hard reality. Is this life-threatening, or is this a superficial wound? Are you just bleeding? Do you need a Band-Aid, or is it something that is far more serious that needs to be addressed? And that's when the partners want to come in. They want to make sure that they're addressing public health and the welfare issue. That, as been mentioned, consent orders and violations. What's broken? Is it critical, or is it something that if you did a little bit more on your own end, could it just be fixed? And so that's part of the balance that has to be made when we're shifting that perspective.
And we understand that often communities feel compelled to do applications because the money's out there and they recognize the money is going to be spent regardless of whether or not they submit an application or not. There will be winners in the state. There will be successful projects that the state or the federal government will invest in. So the concept is, why not? You go back to the lotto, $1 in a dream. Well, sure, you have to be in it to win it, But if you truly are going to invest in that grant application, whether it be staff time, board time, supervisor or mayor time, resources, paying a consultant to do an application, you're investing resources. So you really want to make that best case and give yourself the best foot forward to secure those fundings.
So as you shift that perspective, really making sure that what project you're putting forward is the number one community project. And there may be multiple community projects that are going forward at the same time. You may have multiple grants, but the key objective is proving that this is the project that is most important. And you have to be able to prove it now. You really want to make sure that as part of the process that it's not just your needs, but the community needs. And so looking at how there's the other beneficial kind of expansion of benefit from just your community to possibly others, looking at what you may have done in the past. So had you had unsuccessful applications, what could you do since then to move the project forward? Have you just simply put it back on the shelf? So you were denied application funding and then you put it on the shelf and you're just going to try again next year. Agencies are really trying to understand what have you done since then to keep it going forward. If it's the most important project that you have, you must have done something. You must have at least looked at other options. You might have applied somewhere else. You might have made some small investments. You might have taken an opportunity to look at ways to kind of advance these projects or set aside additional funds. And that's what they really want to understand. As a partner, what are you also doing on your side?
With that, I want to add a few more things on the community commitment. Number one is when you're asking somebody to invest in you, you have to be willing to invest in yourself as well. So look at investing in the documentation necessary. Look at investing in pieces of it. If, as Nicole mentioned, you lost and you're reapplying the following year, do something during that year, whether it's the environmental, whether it's working with SHPA, whether it's getting more community support, whether it's a stopgap, if it's a water main break, do something to prove this is truly your priority. We had a conversation with an agency a few months ago, which kind of prompted this discussion. And they said, well, Ben, honestly, how can it be so important to community A if you haven't done anything in 2 years and you keep coming back to me and saying that it's so important to you? You're just deferring it and kicking it down and waiting for us to give you a handout. And I said, no, that's not really true. Though, but what have you done? And I had nothing to give back. So that's what we mean by proving that it's important to you, not just in the documentation, but also in your own investment. Are you putting money into your budget? Are you adding to your capital reserve? Are you creating a capital reserve? If you see a need for a water extension and you're a town, have you gone through the process of developing your map plan and report? Have you gone to the public hearings? Have you had district formation, or have you had those conversations that prompted the petition to request it? You have to nowadays make yourselves even more important or more project ready, if you may, than somebody else. I think I misspoke. No one's more important than anybody else. But projects are internally triaged in levels of importance by how ready you are to proceed. And that's a big piece. If you go to any of the SUNY ESF or USDA or New York State has these conferences about water and wastewater funding where they bring in the agencies. So you have USDA, EFC, I'm sorry, I'm using alphabets, United States Department of Agriculture, Environmental Facilities Corporation, Department of Environmental Conservation, not conversation, Conservation, Department of Health, counties, CDBG, which is the Community Development Block Grant. You can go on and on. But they bring in these agencies and they really want to see that your project is ready to go. And this shift occurred about 3 years ago. It's been slowly boiling, and those projects that are more ready routinely got more points. But now some of the agencies are blatantly saying, and CDBG is one of them, so the Office of Community Renewal, you must commit to signing a contract in 30 days, having an environmental review done in 60 days, and having your first drawdown in 180 days. That means you have to have that community commitment to progress this project immediately upon award, which also means unofficially, you're going to have to do some engineering design work or planning work or whatever it may be to have that project ready to go to bid upon award. And that's on you. And that's that community commitment we're talking about. Again, Nicole and I have been working together 17 years. I've been here almost 24 years now. So I can honestly say I've worked with hundreds of communities throughout the state, and almost everyone comes out first with, what can I get money for? And every time Nicole and I are going to say, well, what are you ready to, it used to be, what do you need? Now it's, what are you ready to do? And that's a hard conversation to have. It's a hard conversation to say to your town board members or your village board members that we have to invest in order to be successful, to have other people invest back in you. It's almost like you now going to a bank asking for a loan and they want you to put 20% down or show where the collateral is. The state's asking, or the federal government's asking for the same thing in how they rank and review your projects. They're not going to come out and say it. They're going to use that in the ranking sheets.
Now, just to add on that a little bit, I was at the community just recently and sewer came up as part of a comprehensive planning process, and it was identified as a need, but we're at the very beginning of visioning for that process. We haven't had much discussions or details, and there's definitely not engineering that's done. So it was a hard conversation to say, well, this is great that we identified it as a need. However, there's a lot of work that has to happen over the next couple of years to even make that feasible, and to know that you're really a couple of years out when you're just starting those conversations. It needs to be a lot of investment made to really understand what the issues are, the challenges, the cost, and make sure that the community is on board. So some of that can be very time consuming, and it's not very readily able to come in for a handout by any means. So communication early and often is really the key part of this process. And understanding some of the programmatic changes that are happening within each of the agencies. Ben mentioned a bunch of alphabets, a lot of the agencies with all their acronyms.
I went back and gave the full words.
But understanding all of those agencies' regulations and what they might have as expectations. Some of them will have programmatic changes from year to year. For the most part, many of them are very consistent in their approach and how they apply their applications and what is required of them. But there are nuances that just need to be looked at from a year-to-year basis. And understanding the unwritten metrics, something that might not be in there. And that's where the conversations are really important, to be able to have a phone call with those agencies before the grants come out. Typically is when it's more important. They want to have those conversations throughout the year with you to be able to really understand what your needs are and help you craft your project so that it is best ready for those applications. Sometimes they will say, I don't want to be the first one in, but you should go here, or you need to go and talk with so-and-so. And then being able to build those partnerships as you go is an important part of the process.
And sometimes those conversations are best had not only early, but the result can be, no, you're not ready. And if an agency tells you in January that you're not ready, there are two things that can occur. Either you can use that time to get more ready, or you save yourself time and effort. Many of those conversations we've had with the clients and the agencies have resulted in areas that are new to us and new to the community that now the state or federal government are looking for that now make for a better project. So those conversations are critical to have. Remember, you're asking people to invest in you, have those open conversations. Pick up the phone call. I know my kids only use their cell phone for texting or Snapchat, but it's a telephone. Call people. It's as simple as that. Ask people what they want to fund this year, what are changes in their programs, and how to get them to invest in your project. There's very little money when you look at it, but they want to be able to spend it on projects that are solid, that are budgeted, that have other monies in the project, and that are really ready to go upon award, not looking for more funding after their award.
The federal programs require even more of those conversations and making sure that you have those partners at the table. They are very competitive. There may only be one or two that are invested in within the state. And so making sure you have all of those conversations with both state agencies, federal agencies, but also local stakeholders that can assist with those projects is an important part of the conversation. So kind of the next step is looking at what's critical and then the unwritten metrics as well. So really being able to put your money to work and how you are able to do that. So finding ways to leverage those resources from one resource to multiple resources. We talk about it as a funding quilt, and it's an important way to look at how a project is going to be put together, because it's not going to be one grant anymore or one resource that you're able to pull together. It's going to be multiple partners, and that's an important part of the conversation. So part of that is understanding what is needed to make those applications project ready, being able to make your money work right away. Is it shovel ready? And that term is like a buzz term that we hear a lot. And what does it really mean? And so understanding shovel readiness is, have you done a study? Is there an assessment or a report that demonstrates what that need is? has to be clearly written so that both the funding agencies understand what that need is, understand what the project is, understand the costs associated with it. Similarly, have you done a financing plan? Is all the funding committed? Have you gaps in that funding? Many communities that said, well, if I got $300,000 from this agency, then I would just have $500,000 left to come up with. Well, how are you coming up with it? What is the end game for being able to fill in that? Some agencies don't even want to entertain the conversation if you don't have that commitment of how you're going to put the whole project together. They don't want to fund something and then have you not be able to finish the project. And that's the biggest worrisome on their end as well. So you have to be able to prove that you can complete it from beginning to end.
And part of that is passing a bond resolution for the whole project. You're not taking out the money. You're basically filling out a credit card application, putting a new card in a safe deposit box. But you're proving that you have that ability to spend the money in the project. If you're using cash reserves, you should show where in your budget the cash reserves are. If you can even shift into an escrow account, that's even better, but you want to show the money is available. If you're having a third party, you're doing an economic development project and a third party developer is going to be putting in 25%, put that in. We had a conversation about extending a wastewater line or sewer line from a municipal pump station up to the new mobile home park, a manufactured housing community, and the community had to pay $1 million towards it. Well, the agency said it's great. It's not good enough for you to simply say, I'm going to do it. It's not even good enough for us to have a contract in place. I want you to put that $1 million in escrow. So it's really showing your project is ready, the money is available, and it's committed. And upon award, we're going.
Site control is another one, which seems like a logical piece of the pie, that you own the project or own the location where it's going to go. A lot of times that's overlooked with some of our DOT projects where they ask about the right of way. Do you have control to actually build a sidewalk in the right of way? Have you looked at the easements that might be necessary? Have you talked to the property owners? So sometimes it seems simple, but oftentimes it's much more complicated in making sure that you have all the pieces pulled together. Again, they don't want any kind of delays in being able to have that access. And the same goes with some of our water and wastewater projects when you have to be able to put those right in the right of way as well. Preliminary and final designs, making sure that a project is designed and ready to go. Sometimes there's a lot of communities that struggle with being able to make that investment into something that can be very expensive as part of that process. But if it means being able to expedite it from a funding standpoint and having it ready to go, a lot of the agencies are looking for that to be part of the process that's already done and complete, so that when they're putting their monies in, they're able to start construction right away and not have to have that lag for a year or more.
And even if it's not so much good, it's not so much okay anymore to simply say we're going to be designing it during the review process. If you're under contract, put the contract in. If you have an engineer, put the engineering contract in, put the timeline and scope in it so that the funding agencies see when that's actually going to occur. I had a conversation the other day about the old, Popeye. I'll pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. I think it was the Hamburglar or something like that. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It was just the concept was I'll pay you tomorrow for a hamburger today. Same concept here. You can't just go to the state. I'm going to design it at some point between now and then. Show your schedule, show your contract. If you've done the survey, show that you've done the survey. Really exude confidence that your project is going to be designed during that review period. And upon award, you're ready to go. Because what holds up a lot of these is the environmental studies. And you can be saying you're designing, but all of a sudden, OPRHP or historical archaeological, or there's a bog turtle or bumblebee, or somebody at the environmentalists are going to say have to put a halt to the project, and you want to make sure that that's already accomplished and covered in the time period of the grant application.
Exactly.
And yes, I joked about the bumblebees. We need bumblebees.
We do need the bumblebees, but we want to make sure that they're protected, and that's why you do that environmental stuff first. So each of the projects is just a little bit different, and when you're starting to look at some of the different components, and so understanding those priorities that need to be incorporated as part of the applications is important. Ben mentioned WIA was just announced, so this will be opening on May 3rd. And as part of that, it's almost a 45-day window, ready, set, go, once that's here. So in order to be able to apply, you need to have your engineering report complete. You need to have bond resolution. You need to have seeker. You need to have district formation. There are some exceptions to that with contaminated water with the PFOAs. However, that's the bulk of what has to be ready to be able to be included in the application. And so if you're not ready, if you're not going to be able to get those pieces done, you're really not looking at this year's schedule. CDBG is a very similar process, and as Ben mentioned, those contracts, once they're executed, they want to have it done within 30 days. Your review has to have been done within 45 days. That means you've already gone to the bog turtles, you've already gone to SHPO, you already know what impacts are there, so that you're able to do your publications and your notices right away, so that you're able to go to construction within 180 days from having that award. So looking at ways of funding from other resources, thinking at other officers and how they're investing and being able to stretch those funds across more communities. This is what your funding agencies are looking at. So they want to be able to help communities as much as they can. And so in order to do that, they're also looking to you as how are you stretching and leveraging your dollars. Being able to have them as a partner and being able to show what funds are coming in, that they are able to help work with you very closely and being able to kind of commit other funds from other agencies together as part of the process.
They used to be called co-funding. We coined the phrase funding quote because you're taking patchworks of different grants together and making one picture or one overall project. Because many communities, many projects, many state agencies or federal agencies want to be last money in. That means you have to go other places first. And that means looking at, and it's okay to lose, but at least documenting that you looked at other locations, whether it's the Hudson River Greenway or the Northern Regional Border Commission or the ARC Appalachian Regional Council or USDA. If you're going for a state grant through the CDBG program, the Community Development Block Grant, they want to see where else you've gone. And if you've exhausted all other opportunities, then they are the last opportunity for you. But they want to see other monies in. And it's always interesting to me when they go, what other federal money have you invested in you? And I keep saying, but why do I got to go to many federal agencies when I can just go to you? And they say, because we have $1 million. You have a $9 million project. We need to make sure the project is affordable. Have you gone to USDA? Have you gotten, or at least applied for WIA and bill? Have you gotten a federal earmark? What else have you done to commit and leverage other funds in this project, which extends that timeline? And Nicole mentioned to the other community that sometimes this is a 3-year process of getting some funding in. Then you have to recognize early who has to be the last one to apply to and do them last.
And sometimes it's really hard to have those conversations over the phone with just one individual. And this is where we talk about really being able to bring those other partners out to your community. It can be done virtually, it can be done in person. There's a lot of benefit for having an invitation to the agencies to show them what your project is, have them come and walk your park with you, be able to show them some of the challenges that your downtown might be facing regarding economic development. Oftentimes, if they're able to see it together and talk about some of the challenges, they're able to brainstorm with you to say, oh, this would be great for a Main Street New York program, and this would be great for if you applied to EFC for this. Having those conversations with people present, they are able to really start to work with you in identifying solutions to your problems together and be able to help kind of put that funding quilt together as well.
We began working with interagency work groups with the EPA when it dealt with both Superfund sites or brownfields, and it became very useful to many of our clients now establish an interagency work group where the agencies come together to solve the problems. An example can be the Village of Cambridge. The village worked for 2 years to find development opportunities and submit grant applications. They looked at USDA and CDBG, Northern Regional Border Commission, and Economic Development Agency. They spoke to the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Board. And finally, after 2 years of everyone saying, not yet, not yet, not yet, they sat down, plugged out what a $27 million project would look like and what each of the agencies could do to help. And they spoke to each agency at the meeting and said, almost like an Oprah, but reverse. Instead of Oprah saying there's a car for you and a car for you and a car for you, they were saying we need $1 million from you, $1 million from you, and $1 million from you. And throughout that conversation, they were able to create an opportunity for a funding quilt until the USDA said, wait a second, this is all federal money. Last year, they had a lot of federal money coming back into Washington at the end of the cycle, and they wanted to make some larger investments. And the USDA at that time offered Village of Cambridge a $10.8 million grant and a $16 million loan, give or take, to make a $27 million project, all coming out of that funding quilt interagency workshop. So it's important really to pull people together to see how all the agencies can invest in your project and see how they're all communicating to make that project a reality.
And looking at ways that those funding sources can come together from multiple sources. Some of them are going to be local, some of them will be your nonprofits and some other community funds. Some of them can be solutions from other communities. There might be opportunities to share and work together. And so making sure that you have these opportunities to communicate together is an important part of the next steps. The consolidated funding application was built in the sense that you could start to have those conversations. It was envisioned that these partnerships would be able to identify multiple grants in a portal that would allow you to say, oh, okay, I'm going to do LWRP and park money together, and that this would help fund my project. But it's not always necessarily clear on the state agency side that you're looking at both of these resources. So having those conversations earlier than just when you're going to apply is an important part, so that you can start to tell them, this is your share and this is how I'm working together to be able to kind of create this project that will fit together within all your needs and our needs and be able to kind of work together as the we.
And you did that very successfully with comprehensive planning. Communities now, I mean, honestly, this year, there's been more comprehensive planning projects flowing than probably the last decade. And you were able to stitching together the Hudson River Greenway grant, which was a $10,000 grant matched by $10,000 from the community, and using that as your match towards the Department of State Smart Growth grants for comprehensive plans. And when you created that work plan, you showed to both of them how they're working together and leveraging towards the final comprehensive planning process.
Right, and it actually showed a larger commitment by doing it with the Greenway grant. The Smart Growth grant only has a 10% match, but when you're putting in the local share plus the Greenway grant, it ended up being a much larger percentage, and the Department of State found that very favorable in a lot of our applications.
And it also gives you a secondary benefit, is that if you're able to reduce their investment to your total project cost, they can fund another community.
Yep.
So again, going back to that, shifting the perspective, you're asking for them to invest in your project while simultaneously meeting their need to spread their money around other locations. And when we talk about a funding quilt, here's all those acronyms, but we're looking at all the different agencies that are available. And if you contact our office or U.S. Senate congressional offices, they have guidebooks and directories of different grant programs that change each year. But this is just an example of some of them from the state and federal governments that are available to you. And some acronyms are standard to you, USDA, or if you have a water or sewer system, the Clean Water or Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund. Some are newer, like the Water Investment Act. Some are even newer, which is SS4A, the Safe Streets for All. The 4 is for FOR4. A planner made that one up. And they keep working with them. But don't forget the nonprofits. There are many nonprofits in regions, specifically in the Mid-Hudson Valley, that provide grants to communities or neighboring communities for projects.
But on that note, it's very important to know who's the eligible applicant. And sometimes the nonprofit is the eligible applicant and not the municipality, that can get a different source or a different pot of funds that may not be traditional. So really understanding who your partners are may be an opportunity to look at some sources that just kind of are not on the traditional path. And then looking at ways, we keep using the word co-funding or leveraging, looking at different applications is kind of part of the process when you're starting to put some of the projects together. A lot of the CDBG project will ask you, where else have you gone? And for the most part, the CDBG applications are looking at $1 million awards with a $1.25 million if you can demonstrate that you have also received co-funding from another source. And so that's the key part, is looking at where you can put those projects sources together. Typically, WIA is a great source that is used to leverage the CDBG grant funding. They do look at the water and the sewer projects and provide a higher level of funding than typical with a lot of the water and sewer projects. And so from that, you're able to leverage the larger amount of the CDBG funds for the 1.25. And then they marry very well together as part of that process.
So I know we only have a few more moments before we open to questions and answers, but we have a couple of project examples of a funding quilt in play. Number one is the Village of Corinth. They need a new wastewater treatment plant, water system, all new water lines, water mains, sewer mains, and transmission lines. And they went and got funding through CDBG, through SAM grants, through New York Water. They got a 0% loan through the Environmental Facility Corporation, and an additional $1.4 million in grant applications for their pump station and for their treatment plant. It's creating a multiple level infrastructure program, infrastructure plan that was shopped around, if you may, for investment. And most of the agencies that they worked with were able to invest on different pieces. Town of Scholar Falls came to us in Morrisonville, the water system, with a challenge of 80% funded through grants in order to make it fiscally affordable for the residents. We said, that's not going to happen. 60% is what we're aiming for. And they said, we challenge you again, 80%. Came out to be almost 83% when we're done. 1.25 out of CDBG, 2.56 out of the community project funding, which is the earmarks, another 1.3 million USDA grant. Clinton County is adding in almost $1 million of funding because they had a piece of PFOA issues. And then the rest was a USDA 1.8% 38-year loan. And they were able to make happen through that project. But what we want to do, I'm going to turn it over to Tara for questions and answers. The next 4 slides are a listing of potential funding streams by topic. I think Tara's going to have the copy of the PowerPoint available to everybody, so you'll have all those resources. But we want to give you the next 15 minutes or so to ask questions, and we'll be happy to provide answers to you.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. That was excellent. So yeah, go ahead and put your questions in the chat here, and I'll read them off, and we'll get them answered. So there is one in here. I apologize, my phone is ringing behind me, but it's not as much a question as a comment. I work for a state agency that handles a lot of grant programs. Prospective grant-seeking communities would be well advised to begin early pursuit of any potential approvals that would be triggered by grant money. Often these approvals correspond to the level of government doing funding. For example, New York State funding for a project means that seeker and SHPO review may be required before the state agency makes its final approval of your grant. Federal funding may trigger an EPA or Section 106 historic review. The more you can do now to advance these reviews approvals at the local level, the better. There are dozens of grant applications sitting on my desk right now, but they're going nowhere fast because I'm still waiting for local seeker and SHPO reviews to be completed. So this just kind of goes with your shovel ready slide there. Get your things done in advance. So thank you so much for that comment.
It was perfectly said, Matt. I appreciate it because that's exactly what we were hearing all along. People want to see that your SHPO is done, that your seeker is done, that your environmental is in place. They recognize that you're not going to go all the way through full permitting with DOT. But the further along you are, the more apt you are to get funded, and the quicker the project is going to go forward. There's a big change again, as I mentioned 3 or 4 years ago, where it's no longer okay for the state to invest in your project and leave the money in the bank. They'll come back to you next year. They want to fund a project that can really get shoveled in the ground that year. And then the following year, when you're more ready, come back again.
He said thank you. Great. Does anyone else have any questions or anything that we can answer? Great time to get all your grant related questions answered with these experts here, but I'm sure you guys don't mind if people reach out afterwards. Again, I'll share the slides and everything. So
yeah, if I have a difficult project that's just being struggled to have funding, and we're happy to have those conversations to help guide them.
Yes, great point.
And we'll get you a copy of the PowerPoint. So the last 5 pages of the PowerPoint is just, if you're looking for a water project, what grants are available to you. Same with wastewater, parks, recreation, government services, just so you have them as a resource that we can work with. But yes, feel free to reach out to Nicole and myself. We'll be happy to answer any of your questions that you have offline. If there are specific projects in your own community that you have challenges with, we often ask mayors and supervisors, hey, what keeps you up at night? And give us a call with that. And if we can help you, great. And if we can't, well, more than often than not, tell you another firm or another consultant with that specialty that can help you. You know, someone asked me if I can design airports. I said, no, but here's 5 that can. That kind of a thing. We've been around for a while. We're not going anywhere. We're always here to answer your questions and be of assistance.
Great. Well, I think we can give everyone a few minutes back of their day. And again, we're going to have this posted online. And thank you all so much for attending. Thank you, Ben and Nicole, for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
We'll see you all again next week, hopefully, for
Well,
the.
I think you're seeing you next week, right?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Oh, Nicole,
Oh,
you're
no,
back.
it is next week.
26.
Maybe next week.
Well, we'll see you again
I'll
next
see you
week.
again.